Okay, so yeah, right. I think we should kick off pretty quickly. But I mean, to echo what Francois said, it's a really key point, and for people who saw the talk I said before, I'm so interested in open data, not as in itself. I think, sometimes you might say it's just a good in itself, but I think mainly because of what it allows us to do, and in particular build important and interesting projects and tools. And some of the projects we're going to see today are really in that category. And this is one of the things that the working group on open data in science at the OKF is looking to do now as well. Is we've done a lot of work of just engaging the community, telling them why we think openness is important, but also about building projects like these kind, or collaborating with people like this to do stuff with that material. So do we want to just kick straight off?
Right.
Yep.
So just say we had a great workshop. Thanks to Rufus. So we really like this community. It's clear you guys are really talented, and there's a lot of stuff we could do together. Scientists are actually not all that good at handling data when it comes down to it. So we have several people who are taking part in the workshop here. We're going to speak about their projects now, and we'll start with David Anundsen from Imperial College speaking about EpiCollect. You want to stand up?
I guess I need to change the slides around. Am I blocking the screen at all, or is that okay? Yeah, my name's David Anderson. I work in the Department of Infectious Disease Epidemiology. I'm a bioinformatician by trade, so I spend quite a lot of time messing around with DNA sequences, but I'm not going to talk about that at all today. I'm going to talk about a mobile phone app that we developed for helping us initially collect data on presence or absence of infectious diseases. So we spend quite a lot of time developing web apps for particular disease syndromes. I'm going to talk through one of them. These are kind of generic web apps. This is I don't know whether people know about this, but amphibians are kind of currently going through a bit of a crisis due to a fungal amphibian pathogen called Batrachochytrium dendrobatidus. Could everybody hear what I'm saying? Ish? Okay. This is a fungal infection of amphibians that's causing species die-offs across the globe at the moment. It's been around for about 2 years. Batrachochytrium dendrobatidus. The community of researchers within the amphibian world aren't tremendously tech-savvy for getting data centralized. So there was an initiative in the Northwest US to scrape previous publications, to get people to send Excel spreadsheets, fill in forms, etc., and then they would publish a static map every month. So we built them a web application that would centralize all of the data very easily. So I'm just going to give you a few screenshots. This is the kind of application that we developed. So this is a global view, which indicates a live view of the presence or absence of particular disease isolates within a database. So all of this data has been sent in by people using Excel, entered via the web, etc. And it's a live view. So this allows one to zoom down into particular levels, all the way down into states, for example, all the way down into individual latitude, longitude. So this represents a researcher in the field who's gone out, swabbed the back of an amphibian, which is where this particular fungus infects, sent that for laboratory diagnosis, and that's been confirmed, and their pointers on the map. So this is somebody in the field with a notebook, GPS unit, taking a photograph and a biological sample of the pathogen. And this then allows us just to do some pretty trivial surveillance. So what's very important is that we understand and know where the disease is, but also, and probably crucially, where the disease isn't, so we can try and track the spread of the infection. So when Android was announced about 2 years ago, we saw an opportunity to provide the kind of simple data collection tool that these researchers are using, which combines their notebooks. So smartphones, GPS, cameras for taking stills or video, keyboards for text entry, and most importantly, data transfer to and from the kind of central databases that we were setting up. So we published a paper in PLOS ONE, which has one of the finest editorial boards in the world, about 2 years ago, just describing this development. So we realized reasonably quickly that this is a generic issue. Paper forms, GPS tagged, photographs, other media that you can access via the phone, centralizing, and two-way projects. So really any project where you wish to centralize textual data along with the other kind of media that you can access via a smartphone. So this is our kind of overall framework. So central database with the kind of web application that I showed you for the amphibian project. Multiple people downloading a project, going out into the field collecting, sending the data centrally, and then having a web application that allows that data to be interrogated and analyzed slightly more further. So we also wanted to build in the ability to have two-way data transfer, so not just sending data, but also to get some contextual information about what other data people have submitted within a local area. So this is kind of the framework for our generic website. If you have a particular data gathering project, come to the website, give your project a name. We use Google's App Engine to host these services. Design a form, which contains the kind of form fields that you wish to collect in your questionnaire. Load that onto one or multiple mobile phones. Have the data come in centrally, and then have a mapping application that allows you to interrogate the data. So this is just the overall schematic for the generic website, epcollect.net. So I'm just going to run through a few screenshots. I would normally do this live, but we don't really have a tremendous amount of time. So this is our website. Click Create Project, give your project a name, hit the Create button. That's it. This is a permanent URL, which can be referred back to look at the data. You can add a description and some text about your project. First thing to do is to create a form. So click the icon here. We have a drag and drop form builder, consists of 3 parts. So this left-hand section contains the kind of form fields that you can use. So simple text questions, long text questions, drop-down lists, multiple choice, etc. So you just click, drag into the center, and then build up a form. So you can just enter the question that you want to ask and what you want that to be stored as in the database. Various simple kind of validation here. If you want the results that come in to be viewed as a pie or a bar chart, you can click here and then click submit. So just build up a form along that in that line. Go back to the project web page, which is that permanent URL. 2 ways of looking at the data. So what we want to do is actually load this onto the phones now. So this is our Android interface, consists of 3 entries. First thing to do is to load the project. So from the menu, click Load Project. Type the name of the project in that you've just designed, click OK. That communicates with App Engine, downloads a very simple XML description of the project. That's now ready to go. First thing to do is to take a new entry. So every entry is automatically ID'd, time and date stamped. You can take a GPS position from the internal GPS unit or wireless. If you're inside, you can't get a GPS position, but you can add location to the data later on, but I'll show you that in a moment. Tap to take a photograph, attach a photograph to an entry, and then tap to fill in the form. So this is the form that you will have designed with the drag and drop interface. So then what we wish to do is list all the entries that we have. So we're using the SQL database on the phone, so you can have hundreds of entries on a particular device. So this is just one entry that I've entered. You would have a long list, each unique ID based on the unique ID for the particular handset. The N column represents that it's only on the phone, so what we want to do is synchronize that entry with the central database. Once that's done, you go back to your home site, and there are 2 ways of looking at the data. One is a tabular view, which just lists all the entries, all of the fields. This can be downloaded directly as CSV or XML format. All of the images are stored and can be linked to and downloaded as a zip file. And the other view is on a mapping interface. So this is just a generic mapping interface. So for any project that's set up, this kind of interface is there. On the left-hand side, all of the points that one has collected from multiple phones. The middle is all the points plotted on the map, and then these are the charts that can be generated from any field that's entered. We also have a temporal time slider here, which allows you to view entries that have been collected within a particular time period. So we set this going about just over a year ago. There's currently about 5,500 projects. I think just some of them are pretty small, but some of them are slightly larger. So I'll just show you a couple of projects that people have set up. So this is based in Yellowstone National Park. Park rangers looking for distribution of invasive weed species. I'm pretty sure everybody recognizes that as leafy spurge. It's a pretty obvious one. So they're encouraging tourists and members of the public to download a simple form, go along, and if they see this particular plant species, they can take a record, and it's sent centrally. So it means that 3 park rangers don't have to try and cover the entire area. Oxford Archaeology in the UK, whenever there's any major building works, they have to go and do exploratory digs. And historically, they're taking paper forms out, marking down various finds within a dig site, and then collating that into Excel and then trying to plot a particular location. So they've now transferred over to using these kind of electronic-based forms. They've rolled out across Europe 5 major projects where they're actually using. 1 minute left. Okay, I'll rush. A couple of students at Goldsmiths College in the UK. Disclaimer, Wellcome Trust pay me, so we probably shouldn't be encouraging this, but they just take pictures of ephemeral street art so that they can collect it centrally. This is a very nice student project, Evolution Mega Lab. It's to do with the changing patterns of snails, colours and bands. this was a Bath University student, Southwest Wales. They traditionally note it down in paper, put it into Excel, do some basic stats, but now they have the ability to go back and look at last year's results, previous years. So they've got this temporal view of the data, but they can also compare between other institutes within the UK or within another country. Google gave us 20 phones. We gave them to a set of Maasai vets. They're now doing monitoring of vaccination coverage for various diseases in Kenya and Tanzania. The Kenyan Health Ministry are rolling it out across the country. That's ongoing. So they covered 86,000 animals in the space of about 2 months. They're not using SIM cards. Data collection doesn't require data connectivity unless you load the project or when you send it. So they're doing it all via wireless. That's it. Yeah, no reliance on data networks. Data can be sent to any server. We have a very simple XML description that defines where the server sits and where you send the data to and from. I can go into this XML detail with anybody if it's necessary. We have a version 2 coming out which allows linking of more complex forms, and you can define very easily with a tag that you want to take a GPS picture, blah, 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 blah. All right, I'm done. Thank you. Chris Powell's over here. He's a web developer who helps out on the project, so thank you.
Thanks very much. And there will be a Q&A session after this in the room next door, which will be, I hope, much more of a dialogue than just Q&A. And I think you'll do a demo, right? We'll have time for a demo then. But in the interest of time here, we'll move straight on to Carl Christensen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carl Christensen, currently working at Stanford University on the Quake Catcher Network project. I've been working in volunteer computing in the earth sciences for about 8 years, and this is my latest project. Oh, okay. So the Quake Catcher Network, there's the URL up there, is with 2 co-PIs, Professor Lawrence at Stanford and Cochran at Riverside, but pretty much everything's based at Stanford, and we're now getting more international collaborators, starting with Chile and now New Zealand and Mexico. It's opposite the usual volunteer computing you're probably familiar with, like SETI at home, folding at home. We're very low CPU use and low to moderate bandwidth. So that the trick with us is we monitor the built-in accelerometer on your laptop, which most of you have in your laptop, for sort of parking your hard drive heads if there's an accident or you're knocking the laptop off the table. So we started out with that, and unfortunately, a lot of the companies, it's pretty proprietary information. They don't want sort of third parties looking at these accelerometers. So we've kind of had to hack our way into a few laptops. So it only supports the Lenovo ThinkPads and the various Apple Mac laptops. And I'm still trying to show the usefulness to like Hewlett Packard and Dell and other companies. So then we went to the idea of why don't we just sort of design a little USB sensor, with a cable people could plug in that would have a self-contained little sensor in a box, and that's been working pretty well. So I'll show some of that. So just some real basics. So the trick with the project is that there's 2 primary waves in a seismic event: the P wave, which travels faster than the S wave, which is a little slower, but the S wave's usually the one that causes all the damage. So the basic idea of early warning systems, which we're hoping to get to someday, is we detect the P wave, and maybe we'll have 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the type of event, that we could hopefully warn people, get away from the windows, that kind of thing. And this map, of course, California, you can see the fault lines, and that's the probability that there'll be a magnitude greater than 6.7 earthquake in 30 years. So that's why I moved out of California. So I got tired of looking at that. So yeah, like I mentioned, so we have what we call the no-cost network, which is just use your laptop, sign up to the project with the BOINC software, which is the same software you use for all these other projects. And of course, it's kind of noisy data. They're like just cheap 8-bit sensors they throw on laptops and mobile phones, but it's actually been pretty good to detect events, as I'll show later on. But unfortunately, like I said, it's tough to get data on how to access these accelerometers other than reverse engineering, so I've only got it on Apple Macs and ThinkPad laptops. And this is the USB sensor one. We call it the low cost because the sensors we ended up with are about 35 to 150 US, depending on the type and the bit resolution. And we've just got a grant from the NSF, the US National Science Foundation, and we're going to buy 6,000 sensors to sort of sell or mostly give away to schools, that kind of thing. And you can go to that URL if you're interested in getting a sensor. So briefly, some of the challenges. Obviously, the better the sensor, the more sensitivity, the better science we can do. You know, as long as the sensor's mounted in a nice, secure location. Location's obviously tricky because, especially with the laptops, people move around. So I have a simple web page where you can, you know, go on Google Maps and just sort of click your location and even assign various locations and your IP address on map to where you are. Of course, for like the desktop USB stuff, that's more of a permanent setup. Of course, noise is a problem because if you're typing on your laptop and running it, that, you know, you might think it's an earthquake, but we're doing sort of the physics of, you know, large numbers. So if there's 100 people in the Bay Area, you know, maybe a couple of them are tapping away, but we'll know that the other 90 machines are, you know, silent, so nothing big's happening. And timing, there's no GPS clock, so I've done various hacks to just use NTP to sort of synchronize all these computers on the network without having to use, you know, your sort of internal timing stuff. I just get a delta, a timing offset between everybody's computer that I keep track of. Yeah, so there's just the simple page for entering your various locations, and you can map it to different IP addresses if you want, or just set up one. So that's been working out pretty well. So if we hear something from your laptop, it just sends a little XML ping basically when we think there's a event, you know, shaking your laptop, and that way I can map it to an exact location. Okay, yeah, the noise. So like I mentioned, I actually had one guy that was using it to complain to the train company in Texas that the trains were running too early in the morning and rattling his whole house, and he used it as proof. So I probably got some angry texts from the train company coming after me. And so yeah, like I said, from the statistics of large numbers, because we're gonna, you know, we've got thousands of sensors, not just like 10 in an area. We'll know it's not, you know, your cat pounding on your laptop or something. And yeah, it's a pretty quick response. We've developed a fast triggering algorithm, just basically, you know, monitors, I guess, the background activity level, and then we can quickly detect if something's happening. I send a small XML packet to Stanford, and if, you know, we correlate it with like 5 other local people, you know, in the area that, yeah, this really is a seismic activity, then I send a request just automatically, and it uploads the full data streams later on. So it's been pretty efficient about that. And yeah, we're getting responses within seconds. I mean, Blink, the trickle mechanism in the Blink software that I worked on with Dave Anderson is pretty fast. So you have some overhead just setting up the internet connection, but by the time I process it at Stanford, it's only been like 3 seconds. So we're hoping to develop that to more early warning systems, because they usually do like 15 to 30 seconds, and we're getting pretty fast, a lot faster replies. 2? Okay. So this is just our network status of the day. We've got about 1,500 sensors around the world. It's a California project, so a lot of them are California, but you can see we've got quite a bit, even in Europe and Asia. So that's the Bay Area, so we're pretty much saturated around there. This was like our first success with just laptops. Before we even did the USB stuff, we detected a Chino Hills earthquake in July 2008, magnitude 5.4, and we had sensors east and west of it, and that's a little blurry, but you can see this is actually from the laptop, from the data that I retroactively send up if a quake was detected, and it showed up pretty well from the distributions. Here's one in Italy. Big one in Italy we had 2 years ago. So this is pretty early on. Oh, and this was an odd one I brought for the event. There was an earthquake in Germany about 2 years ago, and Germans always being, excited volunteer computing participants. We've got a bunch, and plus the USB sensor we use is a German company, so I don't know if they're promoting it in Germany, but so a guy with a USB sensor in southwest, I think Baden-Württemberg, southwest Germany, actually detected this rare magnitude 4.5 earthquake, and there's the response. And we've done tests on shakes tables with proper seismometers, and these USB sensors are actually compared pretty favorably, considering the price difference is like $20,000 to $100,000 versus $20 to $100. So this is it running under the BOINC thing, the live monitoring. I won't go too much into that. That's basically just a screenshot. But it's a low CPU, so you can run other BOINC projects alongside us, and it shouldn't affect you. And I wrote a standalone program in Qt, because we have a large part of this is educational outreach. So I wrote sort of a nice, hopefully fun for the kids to learn about earthquakes, and here's some more screenshots. They can track their sensor, try to move a cube around. And this one was pretty fun. They jump around the room and they make a plot of their own earthquake and print it out. So that's popular, except with the parents. And so here, my last slides. So the future work, I think the mobile are going to be a big app. So I'm working on getting BOINC itself into like the Android, Google Android mobile development, as well as the Quake Catcher software on that. Probably just use the built-in, phone accelerometer. So that's probably what I'll be working on this summer, and hopefully getting done. So I think with the OpenGL and the communications, it'll be possible, and I think that's going to be kind of the wave of the future, getting these things on mobile devices, especially for like catastrophic area. Like Google gave us 1,000 phones we don't know what to do with. So we're thinking in a catastrophic event, we can ship like 500 phones, put them up fault lines, say in, around Jakarta, Indonesia, for example, and to monitor aftershocks. So that'll probably be in our future plans. That's that RAMP, Rapid Aftershock Mobilization. That's all on the website, so I'm working on that now too, but that's gonna be the next step. All right, that's pretty much it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Carl. And our next speaker is Nicolas Maire from the Swiss Tropical Institute.
And public health.
And for public health.
Yeah, right. So good morning, everyone. I'd like to talk a little bit about one of our big research projects that is in the field of malaria modeling, and that wouldn't be possible actually without being open. In our case, that means open to the contribution of volunteered resources. So before I talk about this project, just a very brief introduction to malaria. That's a disease, a parasitic disease. You can see the red blood cells up there that are infected with this disease, which is also transmitted to other humans via mosquitoes, which occurs mainly in the tropic and is a big health problem there. So the situation's improved in the last few years, but there's still millions of people, or hundreds of millions of people getting sick every year, and many of them dying. And it puts a huge load on the local health systems there, causing a lot of costs. And it's a treatable disease, so there's quite a few things you can do about it, but then none of these work perfect. And because health costs are a big issue in this context, it's pretty important to be able to make rational decisions on where to allocate resources to fight this disease. So that's actually where computers and computing comes in. So what we are trying to do is develop mathematical models, computer simulation models, which allow us to support rational decision making. So what we like to do is, first of all, decide for new possible ways of fighting disease. There's a lot of development going on that we try and say something about which products, given the results they show in early testing, are actually worth receiving further funding and taken through further testing, clinical trials, and product development. It's one thing, always in the frame of thinking about the cost effectiveness and the effect they will have when deployed to real life scenarios, actually. The other thing is that there's various ways in which you can distribute such interventions or reach people. So for bed nets, you can go out and give everybody a bed net, or you could focus on particularly vulnerable groups in the population, like small children or pregnant women. So that's another objective, is to study optimal distribution modes. So we might be asking questions like, what is the minimal profile for a new intervention to be worthwhile, and how are we going to reach people with it? So in order to answer these questions, we developed a simulation model. That is a discrete time stochastic individual-based computer simulation that simulates malaria transmission and epidemiology. So it tries to capture all the essential processes in that transmission cycle and the epidemiology, like a transmission from human to human, immunity that people acquire, the way the parasite develops within the human host, and how people get sick. This is implemented in C++ and is hosted as an open source project on Google Code, the following URL. So this model, we use it, that's just a case study for like a recent simulation study where we tried to predict how cost effective the deployment of a malaria vaccine would be in Africa in this case. So the status in vaccine development for malaria is such that there's no vaccine available at the moment on the market. There's one that's pretty close. It's in late clinical trials, and we hope that it'll be licensed in the next few years. It's a vaccine that tries people to prevent people getting infected. And we know that it's not a perfect vaccine, so it will not provide complete protection, and we don't know very much about how long the effect is going to last. So the question is, how does this compare to existing interventions like mosquito bed nets or improvements? You could also think as an alternative investing in existing case management health system, make sure people get treatment promptly. So what we wanted to know is the predicted cost effectiveness of deploying such a vaccine in terms of how many dollars we would have to spend to avert one of these DALYs, disability adjusted life years. So that's a measure for the burden of disease. And we used computer simulations. We simulated scenarios where we deployed a vaccine, a simulated vaccine intervention, and we compared these with a non-intervention baseline scenario. And we calculated these cost effectiveness ratios. So that are sample outcomes. We actually were quite interested also. Malaria isn't the same everywhere. There's very different settings. And one way of expressing that is that we say something about the initial pre-intervention transmission levels, and we express that as the entomologic inoculation rates, this EIR, and we measure that or express it in terms of how many infective bites from a mosquito an average human in this place gets per year, no, per unit time per year in this case. So we go from very low transmission area where it's very unlikely in a year that a person is bitten to scenarios where people get actually bitten almost every night by an infected mosquito. And you see, if we look at this, this is the x-axis would be the burden of disease that we avert, and the y-axis is how much the intervention costs. That's actually net cost, because we expect the vaccine intervention to cost something, but we also expect to save some costs on the health system. So that is a net cost. And you see that depending on the setting where we go, the results vary very widely. This is also including some uncertainty in the analysis. That's another way, and another very important aspect of looking at these predictions is how certain are we actually that they are accurate. So you see there's many points on there, and that means there's quite a lot of computing power goes into such studies. And that's where this volunteer computing approach now comes in. So we need a huge amount of CPU time. And we acquired that via a volunteer computing project, a BOINC-based, Carl mentioned BOINC, that's a platform for volunteer computing, a BOINC-based volunteer computing project that we started in 2005. That was a collaboration within this Africa at Home collaboration. And it's been running since then. You see a map with people, volunteers contributing from all over the world. These are the people who attach pieces to our project. We have about 50,000 of them who have contributed so far, and it's about 10,000 of them are active at the moment. So I invite you, if you want to visit malariacontrol.net, the URL, attach your computer and help us get some simulations done. There's a lot of work still waiting. So, I mean, just talking a little bit about future plans. I mean, what you've seen from this slide is, it is actually, what this shows, it is very relevant that we know a little bit about the context of where we would deploy an intervention. So what we actually have to do is link these different scenarios to geographic locations, to actual real places on the ground. And it's for some places, when the points are far on the right, it means the intervention actually works very well. And if they're low down, it means that it's relatively cost effective. And you see that this really depends. And there may be places where vaccine interventions are a very good idea, and others where they don't work very well or actually do harm. So what we need to do is, that's another way of expressing that the cost-effectiveness ratio, that's what our models predict, is actually optimal in somewhere intermediate transmission settings, as here in the middle of the x-axis. The cost-effectiveness ratio is lowest, meaning we have to spend the least amount of dollars to save a disability-adjusted life here. So we need to map that onto real-world places. And how do we do that? What do we know about malaria transmission? So there's several databases out there that actually try and say something about that. One of them is MARA, an atlas of prevalence data from Africa, and that's an open access database. It's geolocated points taken from literature where people extracted from scientific publications, either published or unpublished ones, what people measured when they went out and looked at how much malaria was in a place. And they also attracted the geolocations, often, because there's a lot of historic literature too, often based on place names. And so we do have quite a valuable data set, but also one which we know has some problems. These geolocations are not always correct, and we would like to extend that in the future. Now, extracting that information from publications and actually geolocating it is extremely time-consuming, and we hope that in the future, I mean, that's a very simple example to, or very crude method of illustrating that. What we did was just taking geolocations from this database as it exists, and using additional information, place names, to look up on Google Maps. We did reverse geolocation and looked up where these places were and how the Google Map answers would actually differ from the currently located locations. And we see that there's some issues with that. Obviously, sometimes Google will be right or wrong, or sometimes the database, and sometimes both will be wrong. But just to illustrate why this is a difficult task, these are all places, that's Madagascar, these are all places that are called Fiadanana in Madagascar. So you see, this is actually pretty difficult to automate this task. You need to take information from the publication that helps you put that name into context. And we think that's, first of all, that's a task that's very difficult to automate based on what we've tried so far. And it's also something that shouldn't be terribly difficult, or maybe difficult, but it's certainly not more difficult for a non-expert compared to someone who's an expert in this. I don't know how many experts there are in this actually. So what we're currently piloting, with a view to making our predictions more meaningful by being able to place them into context, is a volunteer thinking project. It's based on the BOSSA platform, which is related to BOINC. And what we're trying to do here is design a user interface that will expose relevant information from these publications to volunteers, provide them with tools on the same interface that will allow them to do geolocations. And we want to test and find out if we allow a user population to help us with the geolocations. We replicate these tasks in a way that we actually get an idea of how well this works, whether many people, come up with the same solutions, or whether this is really a very difficult task to do. We hope that we can improve the geolocated database in the future. And with that, I would just like to thank my colleagues in Basel and collaborating institutes who are involved in one way or another in this in the malaria modeling study. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. So we've tried to choose topics that give a sense of the breadth of citizen cyber science these days, and also some topics related to economics and social science, and that's Lucas Mathion, our next speaker from IPEA, economics think tank in Brazil, will be talking more specifically about economics-related data.
Okay, so thank you. So while it's uploading, so I work at this think tank in Brazil. We do economic policy for the government, and this is, so we have this, I'm talking about this tomorrow, about open governmental data initiatives in Brazil, but we have this website called IPEA Data, which is kind of similar for Brazilian data to what the World Bank indicators site does. And we started looking at extending this, and all the data is curated. So we started looking at extending this into the past. So we started doing economic history with the same approach. So we have this project called Statistical History of Brazil, and the idea is to extract statistical data from scanned documents from official and statistical documents at the time, and make them into machine readable and data sets that you can process. So this is the agenda. We can skip this because it's late. So the idea was to recover, document, and disseminate in electronic format this statistical history. So the first step was to digitalize all this collection, and it comes from the and so we did digitalize, and the idea is that first you democratize access. So before you had to be a historian with resources to be able to do meaningful archival research with relevant data, but nowadays we digitalize and all the images are on this website, which you can visit, and then you can access the PDFs. So that lowers the cost, and pretty much anyone can go in and start to be a historian with access to important content. The second reason was that we had to ensure preservation, because this library where the content is kept, they pretty much allowed people to access it. And because the information is so rare, it was getting destroyed, and they didn't have proper supervision of this. So the idea of us scanning was that through scanning, if it's decent enough quality, then you can limit the access a little bit to a more manageable, and so that the original sources last longer. So all this is the library of the Ministry of Finance in Rio, and this library has inherited the collections from the main previous libraries that stored statistical. So this is the collection, well, parts of it. So it's a rare collection of socioeconomic, health, geography, and demographic publications. So you have statistical yearbooks, you have government expenditure and revenue data, economic and demographic census, which run every 10 years from the 1870s. And then public finance, statistical reports, trade statistics, statistical yearbooks for several states. And then we also have newspaper business articles where people would write either in Brazil or they would send a letter to London or some big place where the people were lending money to Brazil, telling the situation of the country. So we have this very significant collection, and so we bought a scanner and start very unprofessionally just scanning, put an intern there and start scanning. So by now we scanned about 1,000 volumes, and it's about 280,000 pages, and it's about 2% of the collection. So doing this, and then economic historian would come and look at this data and say, get an intern, and they would transcribe the data. So we get several very interesting facts, like you get the exchange rate of like the currency rate, and there are other databases I couldn't bring, but there's a database on like how much it costed to go by horse from São Paulo to the coast and different places. So, and this was done very decentralized, and this information people actually transcribe, and sometimes they do research with it, but it gets lost. So what we have now is basically a traditional digitalization project in which you have a library team, and you select the most relevant work, you scan it, you associate, you register the metadata, and then we put a digital repository of a PDF collection. But what we want to is we want to extract the data. So we thought about doing a volunteer thinking or crowdsourcing approach to how to extract this data. So you can do this in, well, we thought about 2 ways. Actually, in the end, we'll have a question and answer. So if anyone knows about a project that already does that, I would be very interested to know about it. But since we don't know any project that does that, we're trying out. So there are 2 approaches we thought of. One is to just ask volunteers to transcribe, and then the other is to do some more computer intensive with volunteers doing pre-processing. So in any case, in either of these 2 ways, we would get machine readable data, which would feed into a statistical database, like a series of indicators, but with data going all the way to the it's very hard to do OCR in this data because it has the typography, it's old, and there are too many pages. And so just a rough calculation, it would take approximately 13 years for well, basically a slave, right? Like an intern working 8 hours a day, translating a big table like this in 20 minutes. So there are other projects that use this approach to transcribe text, but we don't know of any project that uses this for tables. So these are the 2 approaches I said. You could kind of have people helping to pre-process, so they could mark rectangles in an image. This is just a mock-up. And then the OCR could take this information and run better. So that's one approach, but the other approach is just give some sort of interface where they just see a regular spreadsheet, and then just transcribe the information and annotate stuff about the relevance and the metadata on this specific table. Yesterday during the workshop, we did develop a beta version that pretty much does this, and it works. In the end, if someone is curious, we can show that. Yeah, and these people who help do this. And I'm just the guy doing the citizen science part of this project, but there are many other researchers in the group.
Thank you very much, Lucas. And as he mentioned, we had a great deal of input from this community yesterday in moving this project forward. So our last speaker in this session is Daniel Lombrana Gonzalez from the Citizen Cyber Science Center.
What I'm going to present you is how also we can use volunteers for improving maps, which nowadays are really important. So basically what I'm going to show you is how maps are basically a part of our lives. So now that we have Google in our phones. So we use basically all of us Google Maps for going to find the best bar or going to the metro station, something like that. So the idea for humans is just use maps for knowing where we are and where we want to go. And the most interesting thing from maps is when we have the option or the opportunity to add more data to the map. So for example, here we are seeing a map from from Birmingham, and the red spots, I don't know, well, basically the round spots that you can see there is the bombing that Nazis did in this city. So the historians basically use this to study how they bombing, they go, which places were important for bombing, etc. So you can get more information from the map from just going to a specific place. So obviously these kind of maps have been done by experts, but there is an extra step, which is using volunteers, as volunteers for help. There are two approaches basically this approach is by Google, so the only difference is that they are asking people to, for example, say, this is a university, this is a coffee shop, this is whatever we want to do. But the problem is all the data is private, it belongs to Google. We will not be able to download it, even though we are volunteering our work. And in the other case, what we have here is a map created by the volunteers when the Haiti crisis. The volunteers created all, they basically map the city in 24 hours, something like that, and help the NGOs to help the people in the field. They were the first ones in releasing maps for helping people in the area. This was done thanks to the volunteers, and the most important thing, it was open in the more wide sense. The data is available for everyone, and it doesn't cost anything. However, even though we want to use volunteers, there are several challenges, and the most important one is the data quality and accuracy. Imagine that you say there is a water supply in a specific place when you have a crisis, and you send all the people from this NGO to this place, and suddenly you find there is nothing there. It will cost money and sometimes could cost lives. So that accuracy is really important when you ask volunteers in this kind of projects to help you. So this is one of the challenges that we will have if we want to go in this way. And the other one, as we are going to have volunteers, usually we have hundreds to thousands, depends on the interest in how it's appealing for the volunteers, but basically they get interested. You will have to organize them, manage them. It will be interesting how to split them in different teams so they can do different jobs or cover, for example, different places in our city. So taking into account that, from the Citizen Cyber Science Center, we are creating or studying these approaches and trying to provide a solution that will improve the data quality and also how to manage volunteers and organize them. So the idea basically is that we have CyberMapper, which is a research project within the foundation. And we want to change a bit or study how we can, for example, improve the quality of the data by how we can organize the volunteers. Usually, most of the projects are task-driven, so spontaneous, like in Haiti. People just collaborated in a non-organized way. So you have like thousands of collaborations suddenly appear in your map. And we think we can improve that if we can split the volunteers and do a better job. Also, we think that is really a key factor to have a training people, saying how they have to report the data, how they have to give you the data. And also rewarding good contributions. This is also important because we will have like people that are more experts than others, and we will want to reward them how good they are, and also for at some points ask them to solve specific problems that other volunteers might not be able to solve. Finally, as we have seen today with EpiCollect or other platforms, the mobile platforms will become really important in this kind of projects because we will be able to grab data directly on the field. So one example use case that we will work is basically to try to understand the past using several satellite imageries. For example, here we can see this is from the Japan tsunami. It's really recent. So we can see here, this was the after and the before the tsunami. So the idea is that the volunteers will be able to see, like moving just on a slider or something similar to that, how an area was affected, and they will be able to tell you, okay, here is the damage area. So we will be able to do damage assessment, or for example, define a specific places where you have deforestation. So right now we are focused in one project where basically we are asking volunteers to help us in geotagging photos. This is really important in the sense that we have all the media and also the rebels people take photos in a crisis, like for example in the Libya war. They would love them to Flickr, to newspapers, etc., but they are not geolocated. So there are NGOs and agencies that it will help them to have these photos geotagged so they can know in which places the action is taken. And for example, move the people to help other the local people, or say, for example, give some supplies like water, food, whatever. So here you have some screenshots. Right now, this is not open for everyone. We are running just an experiment to know. As I said before, we are trying to improve the data quality, so we are experimenting and researching on this topic. And as you can see, we provide them a photo. This is from the New York Times, and we ask them to do a detective work. It's like we are playing a game. We know where this photo was taken, but we are trying to figure out if the volunteers, without no knowledge or no context at all, they will be able to investigate a bit on the web and try to figure out where the photo was taken. Then we will compare and see if this is good or bad for us. Additionally, we want to also search how we can improve the data quality by splitting the tasks. For example, the parallelization. We will have like one tile. Imagine that this is our interesting area from a map, and we want to ask the volunteers to mark a specific point. So we will have we will split the task to different users, and each user will report a different point in the task. So at the end, we will be able to, based on algorithms or based again on humans, agree on a specific 2 points. Imagine like here. So these only 2 points are the good ones, but each user saw the image in a different way, and then you will get more feedback than if you just run an algorithm. Another option is to use like the Wikipedia approach. Instead of splitting the task to different users, we use the same task, and we show them just the last version. So from one volunteer to another volunteer, we are saving the last changes. You can go back on history and see if every time we are improving or not. So we are studying this process and see which one is the best one for each project. And probably we will find that there is no a specific solution for everyone. We will, in some projects will work this approach, and in the others will work the other. As I said, we are using, or we are researching also how we can reward good contributions. We are using a technology which is called HP Glow. Basically, it's a recommendation system. You can go to the website. It's for discovering restaurants. Yeah. It's for discovering restaurants or something similar. So the idea here is that they give you a virtual budget. So this budget can be used for recommendations. So we are going to use this in our case for, you find something interesting, so you invest some of this money to say, well, this is a water supply. If your investment is good, you will get more money, more virtual money back, so you will become an expert, and you will have your reputation will improve. So the idea is to create a meritocracy where experts will be better in the sense of recommending or finding or doing tasks. So as conclusions, well, we are building a new, not framework, but a solution or a research project for this kind of tools. And we are researching in data quality, volunteer organization, training people, and data acquisition on the field. That's all. As our future project, as I said, we want to create a project for deforestation. Like here, this is an image from Google. The idea is, yeah, this is the last one. You can see how, by going through the time, you can see where the deforestation is. So we will ask volunteers, we will show something similar to this, and they will be able to mark where deforestation is. Done.